Hi, everyone. My name is Isabel Varney. I'm the STEM Community Coordinator with the Undergraduate Research Hub. And so I'll be the moderator for the first half of the meeting, and then I'll be passing it over to Sophia for the second half. And as for our flow today, we will have each student researcher share about their project for about 10 to 15 minutes each. And like we've said, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I'll be watching over our chat and then I can direct them to our panelists. So first, I'd like to give a warm welcome to our first presenter, Marie Sadri.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I will go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Amazing. Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mary Sadri. I'm a third-year undergraduate student studying economics and data science here at UCSD. I am here presenting a undergraduate law review article. I'm here representing UCSD's undergraduate law review organization. This has been really a project that I've been able to pursue over the last couple of years. And so before anything else, just a huge thank you to the undergraduate law review community for, following my ideas and definitely working on improving them and always making sure that our facts and our analysis is up to date. So with that said, I have a bit.ly link to the 30-page article, which will hopefully be published on eScholarship later this month. But if you'd like to read the final draft on Google Docs, you're welcome to use that link. But to get into the content of my paper, as you guys may know, the Health Insurance Portability Accountability Act has been in the healthcare system since 1996, meaning that it was established in the 20th century and it is being used for a rapidly expanding 21st century now, America. And so really the core of my analysis and my research in this is HIPAA really adequate for our developing cyber network, especially in healthcare? So before getting into the content of my paper, really just evaluating the why. So like I mentioned, HIPAA was ratified in 1996. We are now in 2024, meaning that, the healthcare and healthcare data, or the amount of it rather, in our systems is only increasing throughout time as more people get involved in the healthcare system, et cetera. And so this kind of nationwide surge or increase in data can underscore, or rather show us, the need to address privacy laws that were written over 20 years ago and kind of reevaluating their effectiveness through analyzing court cases. So as we can see in this graph here by HIPAA Journal, or rather the bar chart shows that HIPAA or data breaches have only increased as the years have gone on, meaning that we may need to look back at what has been written in the past. So my law review article kind of was split into three sections, or three kind of ways of thinking as to how we can change HIPAA. The first one is more specific to the privacy rule and the security rule. These kind of acts within the larger HIPAA Act are really cornerstones to how electronic health information is processed. And so by looking at these, which were written in the early 2000s, we begin to see kind of some holes in the system. Then the second section of my article is looking more closely at the state law specifically related to health security. So HIPAA is kind of conducted at the federal level, but we are in the United States, so each state has laws which can sometimes preempt what is the federal law. And so this can kind of create issues with imposing laws, but also it can be something that we use to our advantage in kind of figuring out how we can restrain strengthen HIPAA at the state level specifically. Section 3 in the last major section of my article looks at GDPR and HIPAA specifically, GDPR being kind of the Health Data Security Act within the European Union. Rather, it is expanded to not only healthcare, but other sectors of data security and privacy. And so what we do is we look through GDPR and what has worked at the European Union, and rather in the individual states in the European Union. And then we can see how HIPAA can possibly benefit from what has already been done overseas. So just kind of going into the bulk of my article again, it is split into the 3 sections, and then we kind of end by tying them all together in the conclusion and seeing really how can we use the information and the conclusions from sections 1, 2, and 3 in order to create like a roadmap for reforming HIPAA holistically. So getting into what HIPAA is, HIPAA aims to safeguard 3 distinct entities. So we have the actual healthcare plans, we have healthcare cleaning houses, which are, insurance companies, for example, that kind of permit the authorized transfer of electronic health information from authorized user 1 to authorized user 2. And then lastly, we have the actual healthcare providers that electronically transmit information, also known as covered entities. So like discussed a couple slides ago, HIPAA is kind of a conglomerate of multiple acts. So we have the privacy rule, the security rule, and then the breach notification act, which are kind of the 3 big ones that people know. However, my article really focuses on the security rule because it deals with electronic health information specifically. So in 1996, most, if not everything, was on paper, but we have made the transfer to electronic or online kind of health storage, health information storage. And so it's important that we strengthen and make sure that the security rule is even more up to date than maybe some of the other acts. And so that's why I focused on it a little more carefully in my law review. Okay, so going into the security rule more specifically. So this is a critical aspect for handling electronic protected health information. So it's a little less broad and a little more reductionist than the privacy rule, but it was kind of first based on 3 different pillars of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Thus, my paper seeks to essentially ask ourselves, does confidentiality, integrity, and availability still apply, or rather, is the security rule still doing this in 2024? So something big that was discussed, or something that we found kind of as writers and editors in undergraduate law review, is a lot of the terminology was very lax, especially given the stark amount of data breach increases over the last few years. But an example of it being lax can include how requirements were changed to standards, and in general, a lot of public input was given for the Security Act from healthcare professionals that didn't necessarily know or anticipate kind of the online transition of storing health information. Going into the actual court cases and kind of the law review part of this article, we start by analyzing Banner Health and their kind of court case with their failure to comply with the HIPAA security rule, which was just discussed. So this resulted in a significant data breach affecting millions of patients, and it really underscores the importance of stringent cybersecurity rules and how, if we don't have them, they can affect many individuals. Banner Health reoffended, meaning that even after they were given a kind of action plan of what to do, as well as kind of a fine, they were, they reoffended, meaning that they continued to not comply with the Security Act. And again, just further shows the potential non-effectiveness of such imposures and kind of their consequences. Another law or another case that was discussed was the Montefiore Medical Center. So this medical center faced severe penalties due to a deficiency in conducting risk analysis specifically risk analysis is very important, especially as we continue to increase kind of the volume of data and data management in our healthcare systems. So the risk analysis is an important part of the HIPAA security rule, meaning that they were non-compliant in this. They really failed to establish the methodology behind conducting the risk analysis laws and the risk analysis process. And this was on their end due to what was claimed to be a broad definition of a crucial component. So a broad definition to what is and isn't risk analysis. So kind of as a researcher, as a writer, and the editors as well, we kind of claimed that they should have a more stringent and more reductionist approach to having risk analysis methods that these healthcare systems need to comply by. So our next question addressed in section 2 is how do state statutes factor into HIPAA settlement cases at the state and district levels? More specifically, how can the conflicting friction we see in our analysis between state law and federal law be mitigated, and how can kind of the dichotomy between state and federal law be used to our advantage when protecting EPHI? One of the major court cases discussed in this section was the legal case of Vigil versus Muir Medical Group. So this arose from an allegation of negligence concerning the unauthorized access and exposure of the EPHI of more than 5,000 individuals by a member of Muir Medical Group. And although this data was shown to be kind of almost stolen by the employee in question and thus leaked and breached due to one of California's significant medical acts, it was claimed that this actually was not a violation, or rather there was no penalty imposed here because of some loophole found by the Muir Medical Group, which involved the fact that there was no direct proof that this data was breached, besides kind of the eyes and what was seen afterwards. So the fact that there was no actual proof that this data was breached mechanically, the medical group specifically was not imposed any fine. And again, this was despite the plaintiff kind of having proof that the data of over 5,000 individuals was breached. Going into the third section of our article, we have distinct frameworks between HIPAA and GDPR that are evaluated on separate roles and then kind of merged together and compared and contrasted. So HIPAA focuses on health information specifically, so personal health information, whereas GDPR protects all personally identifiable information, even down to phone numbers and emails or things unaffiliated with health. So with that said, it was claimed in this article and through our research that GDPR is more comprehensive in safeguarding all personal health information, and it kind of plays a more tangible role in governing the 27 members of the European Union as compared to HIPAA. HIPAA's failure is what we're claiming to govern the 50 United States in the country. So we were able to make a direct comparison between the effect GDPR has, or rather the kind of the reach it has on the 27 states versus HIPAA's reach on the 50 United States. And furthermore, we were able to use Portugal as a country that has implemented both health protection, data protection laws at a country level, and then how they were able to use GDPR to further strengthen their data protection laws at a country level. So what we want to see from the United States is HIPAA, which kind of has a very holistic overview of how data should be protected, more specifically, how electronic health data should be protected. And then we would like the 50 states to use kind of the HIPAA framework, the HIPAA Act specifically, and then add on even more imposures based on not only what is right for the specific states, but also what their people want to see. So we have kind of multiple layers working together in order to create the most effective solution. So HIPAA's broad language, once again, we argued made it a little bit challenging to align with state laws. And so by providing clear exceptions to HIPAA's disclosure, we're able to make exceptions to both federal and state regulations. So GDPR, as was discussed, allows for additional layers of data protection. We were able to see this done through Portugal's Data Protection Authority Act. So once again, just to summarize, this article advocates for a tailored approach to improving patient data security. It advocates for a federal framework which prioritizes standardized state-level regulations on top of federal regulations. More so, it highlights the proactive relationship between GDPR and the EU member states, exemplified by what was our example in the article of Portugal's alignment with GDPR standards to enhance consumer protection. So, given GDPR's emphasis on user autonomy and specificity in handling ePHI, this article creates a direct comparison in order to urge state lawmakers to introduce laws refining HIPAA terms and risk analysis infrastructure to better safeguard patient information in the United States. So thank you. I believe my time is up. Just thank you to my team for helping me out. Thank you to the undergraduate law review team for supporting the ideas and always eager to make edits on my paper.
Thank you. Thank you, Marie. Let's see. Do we have any questions for Marie? No. Okay, well, I have a question. I was curious that when you examined the GDPR's laws and languages, did you come across anything in terms of weaknesses in their laws or anything that raised any concerns that you would recommend they could improve on?
Yeah, that's a great question. Definitely, since GDPR is more broad in kind of protecting user consumer data, I found that actually kind of the opposite of HIPAA. It wasn't specific enough in safeguarding some of the health and health network specific kind of things going on in Europe. So I guess in other words, it did a great job at kind of creating a very holistic breach on how we should connect or how we should protect data in healthcare, advertising, business, etc. But more specifically, when looking into health, I think HIPAA actually had some nuances, especially in its Privacy Act, that GDPR didn't have. So GDPR is a lot newer than HIPAA, so it's still being, developed and it's still in discussion. So hopefully over the next 10 years, we'll see some more specificity in their health data protection specifically.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's great. All right. Any other questions? All right. Thank you, Marie. So now I'd like to welcome our second speaker. That'll be James Delicio. Take it away, James.
All right, let me share my screen. Okay, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Great, cool. All right, hi. First of all, thank you so much for having me. My name is James Delicio. I'm an undergraduate student studying cognitive science and film studies. This research I've been conducting under the mentorship of Professor Daisuke Miyao in the film studies department. And I will be presenting on the relationships between Japanese jidaigeki, American westerns, and science fiction film. Specifically, I will be reimagining these genres as a means of engaging in transnational cultural dialogue. This research has taken the shape of a video essay, which I will be screening momentarily. But first, I would like to provide some background and context on the methodology. So for those unfamiliar, jidaigeki roughly translates to historical drama and refers to the wider genre of Japanese period piece films set prior to the Meiji Restoration in 1868. A large sub-umbrella of this genre is chambara, or sword film, which is what we typically refer to as samurai film in the US. And I trust that many of us are familiar with Westerns and science fiction. Much of the scholarship on the relationships between these genres currently understands them as having either only superficial similarities or existing within this sort of linear series of adaptations which progresses from Japan to the United States. For example, one can see the appropriation of a samurai film like Akira Kurosawa's Yojimbo here on the left into a film like Sergio Leone's A Fistful of Dollars on the right. This film was appropriated almost shot for shot into the Western remake, which was a wider trend that we saw happening in the 50s and 60s. Later in the 1970s and 80s, this influence of Japanese jidaigeki manifested once more in popular sci-fi films like Star Wars. These appropriations can be contextualized by the censorship of Japanese film, which took place under the US occupational government, which ruled Japan after World War II. Jidaigeki were censored for being violent, feudal propaganda pieces in the point of view of the US, and American Westerns were imported as a suitable alternative for these historical dramas. This hegemonic cultural influence that America exerted over post-war Japan, combined with a growing domestic American fascination with Japanese culture, likely influenced the eventual export of jidaigeki to the United States, where they were then adapted into these Western films. This culminates in a popular understanding of a relationship between Japanese and American genre film, where the former is appropriated by the latter. It's crucial to recognize that whenever we assert a linear succession from jidaigeki to the West and the sci-fi, we are essentially positioning American film as the endpoint, which Japanese film must adapt into. This sort of linear historical construction is a very popular discourse that finds its way into a lot of Oriental ideas like the March of Progress, where Eastern countries have to move towards the enlightened Western endpoint. A linear model of genre film thus enforces wider discourses that assert the United States as a culturally dominant force and Japan as sort of this passive victimized entity. And so essentially by changing the way that we think about the relationships between jidaigeki, the Western, and science fiction, what we essentially are doing is reshaping how we think about the cultural relationships between the US and Japan. Rather than assuming a dominant West and passive East, reimagining genre film allows us to place these countries in conversation and creates new opportunities to consider historical counter-narratives that can problematize these harmful discourses. Scholars like Takashi Fujitani have begun this work by exploring Japanese remakes of American Westerns, sort of examining cases of influence flowing in the opposite direction. He argues that such films are counter-hegemonic acts of reappropriation, which can expand sort of the way we understand the exchange of cultural knowledge between the US and Japan. For example, pictured here, the jidaigeki remake of the popular Western Unforgiven recenters the experiences of women and indigenous people in the film, and sort of takes a more active role in grappling with the impacts of colonialism in these historical genre films. Continuing this work, in my research, rather than the previous linear model, which is the current popular understanding, I instead propose a distributed way of viewing these genres, which places the US and Japan into co-equal conversation. Rather than asserting historical linearity, I instead model them as parts of an entangled web. In doing so, a new way of viewing emerges, in which these genre films transform from what were previously sites of cheap appropriation into a map of the histories of cultural exchange between the US and Japan. In essence, by widening our view of genre and the relationship between genres, we can gain a new lens through which we can examine transnational relationships and the exchange of culture between nations. Finally, before screening the video, I'd like to take a brief moment to talk about the methodology, why videographic criticism as opposed to more traditional forms of scholarship. For research in film studies, videographic criticism offers some key advantages. The video essay, first and foremost, affords the opportunity to conduct film studies in its home medium. Much like one would do literature studies in writing, it's intuitive to do film studies using the moving image itself. Rather than losing information in the translation from film to word, videographic criticism allows for the direct manipulation of film material. It also opens the door for the rhetorical strategies of film editing in scholarship. For example, in the video, which you'll soon see, I make heavy usage of techniques such as split screens, juxtapositions, and match cuts to emphasize the tight bonds between these genres. I also take advantage of the temporal dimension which video opens up by lining up clips to emphasize similarity not only in their visual composition, but also in temporal aspects like shot length and order. These affordances are unique to the video essay, and they've proved invaluable for this project. Finally, before I screen the video, I would like to, of course, quickly say that this project is still ongoing. Jidaigeki, Westerns, and science fiction are all incredibly vast genres that are constantly expanding, and I welcome any suggestions for future research with open arms. And now I will hope that the video works. Please let me know if there's any problems with the audio, but yeah, please enjoy. Let me just take a moment to...
In the episode Sanctuary of the Mandalorian, the titular bounty hunter finds himself defending a farming village from attacking raiders. To do so, he partners with another bounty hunter and teaches the village to fight. He entertains the idea of staying in the village with a woman before leaving. In this film, a wandering cowboy assembles a group of gunslingers to teach a village of farmers how to defend themselves. After the battle, one of the gunslingers stays in the village where he has fallen in love, while the rest ride on. But The Magnificent Seven is itself a remake. Again, a wandering Ronin is hired by a village of rice farmers. He assembles a group of samurai, and they teach the villagers to fight. One falls in love with a villager, and the survivors depart. Seven Samurai becomes The Magnificent Seven, which becomes Sanctuary. This pattern between Jidaigeki and Westerns extends. Yojimbo is appropriated almost frame for frame into A Fistful of Dollars. Harakiri becomes Requiem for a Gringo, and Adventures of Zatoichi becomes Blind Man. During the US occupation of Japan after World War II, Jidaigeki were heavily censored in favor of American cinema. The occupational government saw Jidaigeki as violent imperial propaganda pieces. The success of films like Ugetsu and Rashomon, which would later be turned into The Outrage at international film festivals, brought Jidaigeki into the American consciousness, and Japanese cinema began distributing in the US. Western studios saw potential in Americanizing Jidaigeki for domestic audiences, and clearly they did so with ease. As time advanced and the space race turned audiences toward the stars, the Western too moved from the open range into the final frontier. Films like The Valley of Gwanji show early efforts to bring sci-fi to the Western, and decades before The Mandalorian adapted Magnificent Seven, Battle Beyond the Stars did it first. The Western and sci-fi seem like a natural pair. Both rely on the setting of an open, unsettled frontier. But Jidaigeki and the Western also have thematic overlap. Both take advantage of their nation's mythologized history and often feature displaced warriors struggling to adjust to modernization. Some argue that both genres reflect the economic and political shifts in the US and Japan from agricultural market societies to industrialized planned economies. Without much difficulty, one can construct a historically plausible linear model of these genres as a series of cultural transactions. In this model, Jidaigeki films were exported from a politically vulnerable post-war Japan and appropriated into westerns in the United States, From there, they were translated once more into sci-fi to satisfy shifting audience demands in the changing political climate of the space race. However, this model, which posits a one-way transactional flow of influence where the US is the active dominating force and Japan the passive victim, fails to account for the history of Japanese reappropriations of westerns and sci-fi back into Jidaigeki. Consider Akira Kurosawa's Sanjuro, which lifts many of the structural beats of Shame. A wandering warrior reluctantly takes on a young mentor, partakes in a deadly final duel, then departs. Even more explicitly, Unforgiven was directly adapted into Yudu Sarezaru Mono in 2013. There's also Sukiyaki Western Django, a prototypical cowboy flick made by a Japanese cast and crew. Even the Jidaigeki that influenced the cowboy films of the 50s and 60s find their roots in Western influence. Akira Kurosawa famously drew inspiration from the films of John Ford, and as early as the 1920s, westerns like The Mask of Zorro were being reimagined as Jidaigeki. In fact, the Japanese imperial government at one point banned Jidaigeki production because they were deemed to be too Western. Clearly, the relationship between samurai and cowboy is more complicated than a one-way transaction. Their relationship to science fiction is no different. Star Wars began as a film that drew inspiration from both Jidaigeki like The Hidden Fortress as well as Western gunslingers. But in 2021, a group of Japanese animation studios released Star Wars Visions, a series of shorts that took the franchise back to its roots. Films like Blade Runner incorporate Japanese influence into their sci-fi futures, and from the 90s to the 2000s to today, hybrids between the Western and science fiction continue to please. Limiting these genres to a linear, one-way progression of influence ignores the rich history of cultural dialogue between the US and Japan, and risks confining Japanese cinema to the role of a passive commodity for Western consumption. It also ignores the contributions of Jidaigeki remakes of Westerns. Takashi Fujitani argues that the reappropriation of the Western back into Jidaigeki is both an act of cultural dialogue and of recentering marginalized voices. Yudu Sarezaru Mono, for example, heavily expands on the role of women and indigenous people compared to Unforgiven. Rather than the linear model of influence, which is historically convenient but ultimately rigid and limited, perhaps we ought to consider these genres as nodes on a distributed web of influence, in which each genre is entangled in its wider transnational context. More than a mere series of appropriations, these genres become a site of an ongoing cultural dialogue between the US and Japan, in which both nations play an active role. The result of this web is a more dynamic understanding of transnational cinema, one that brings back into focus marginalized voices and accounts for counter-hegemonic reappropriations of cinema.
All right. I know I'm a few minutes over time, so I won't say anything else, but thank you all very much for your time, and I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, James. Looks like we do have one quick question we can take right now from William. Do you want to unmute?
Hi, James. Great essay and fascinating to hear your talk on this. I was wondering about two things. First of all, I think the sci-fi element is really interesting, but it would be great to see some more evidence there. And I was wondering if there was any further kind of stuff, especially from anime, that drew from Westerns. And then also looking maybe further afield than just Japan and to other places where Western and particularly American occupation was reflected. It might be interesting to look at Korean film as a place where American film was reinterpreted. I was thinking particularly of The Good, the Bad, and the Weird from the early noughties during the Hallyu period.
Thank you, Will. Yeah, first to your question about science fiction, definitely in with more time or future research, I would love to dive into that. I agree. It's definitely the smallest point on the sort of triangle we've built here. I definitely think, especially in anime, like you mentioned, there's a lot of overlap. Cowboy Bebop is in particular a huge. I mean, that's right smack in the middle of these three genres that we're talking about. And so I really would enjoy spending some more time with that, as well as a lot of the more recent Star Wars entries. Things like Ahsoka lift a lot of signifiers from samurai film and Jidaigeki. And so I think in future research, looking into these like more modern entries would be very interesting. To your point about expanding to other nations, I totally think that would be an interesting expansion as well. Um, I did keep it limited to just the US and Japan because there's so much there in this back and forth between the Western and Jidaigeki. But I mean, a lot of the Westerns we're talking about are kind of their own pieces of transnational cinema, thinking about like things like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, or the spaghetti Westerns that were made in Italy. So there's certainly a whole lot of loaded transnational influence happening here. So I think there's a lot more work to be done.
Thanks, James. Hope you enjoy your further research.
Thank you.
Dr. Artis.
I'll just be brief. First, great job. I think there's quite a bit to talk about what masculine genres these are, the Jidaigeki, the Western, and whether the movies are criticizing masculinity or presenting paragons of masculinity, whether to some degree the kinds of Japanese films, and you kind of brought these up at the end too, but hentai, anime, some of the other ones that are maybe not genre, or films that are not looking for maybe a male audience or a masculine center, are finding an audience too, and maybe doing more of a kind of a leadership of finding an American audience that wants these kinds of cultural doors, gates that don't require men at the center, right? So I'm just wondering if you've seen, or if you, after looking at this, you have come to think about why some of these early influences were so brawny, because the Western is a great place for movies to talk about a male hero, but are we moving beyond that? Or, did Japanese films give us a way to re-examine this? I know that's a lot, and I know
No, it's great. Yeah, and it's something I haven't considered super in much detail with regards to this specific project, but some of the scholars working in this similar space, particularly Takeshi Fujitani, he definitely sort of grapples directly with thinking about ways that these Japanese reappropriations, right? So it's sort of taking back the Western, do often take an active role in rethinking how we depict women, how we depict indigenous voices, kind of grappling with a lot of these like hegemonic social structures. And so I think there is a lot of interesting work being done on that in the field, even if it's not something that I'm particularly tuned into in this project. But yeah, thank you. That's a really great insight as well.
All right, well, we do have a little bit of time left because we actually are going to go until 5:15. Hopefully that's what people are expecting. But we do have our third speaker for this afternoon. This is Suhana Singh speaking about pediatric leading causes of death among Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders compared to non-Hispanic whites.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let me just start screen sharing. Okay. Are you able to see my screen? Okay, awesome. So hi everyone. My name is Suhana. I'm a second year global health major, and today I'll be talking about pediatric leading causes of death among Asian American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders from 2005 to 2019. So pediatric mortality is extremely important to study. It measures the health of a community or nation and highlights vulnerabilities and guides public health officials towards interventions that improve child well-being and overall public health. And at the end of the day, kids aren't supposed to die. So it is truly a measure of how social determinants of health in a region impact child welfare. And so current literature, there's extensive research on the leading causes of overall pediatric mortality, and causes of pediatric deaths differ in the US compared to other countries, but most mortality studies only look at adult populations or specifically the under 5 or neonatal mortality. And so that's where we identified a gap in the literature and identified a need for this research project. So there's very little data on pediatric mortality for Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander children in the United States. And of the data we observed, many of it was not disaggregated for the different subgroups within that larger group of Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. So metrics generally tend to indicate that Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders have better outcomes compared to their peers, but without disaggregating, it's impossible to be aware of differences in outcomes and understand different health needs of the diverse populations within the umbrella of those groups. So for our research, we wanted to describe the differences in leading causes of death for different subgroups, and then also just describe the total number of deaths, crude mortality rates, and rate ratios for all causes of death among disaggregated groups, and stratifying by biological sex and nativity. So for our methods, we use data from the National Center of Health Statistics from 2005 to 2019, and organized our racial and ethnic designations based on national guidelines. And then we also focused on specific pediatric age groups, which is crucial because there's significant physiological, developmental, and behavioral variations among these ages that result in different patterns of mortality. And then we used the ICD-10, which is the International Classification of Diseases, to gather our causes of death. And then we also used the CDC's web-based injury statistics query and reporting system, again, to just gather causes of death and make sure that we cover all our bases, because the causes of death can differ for non-Hispanic white populations and Asian American populations. And then for the population counts, we used the American Community Survey, and we calculated rates and rate ratios from that data. So for our results, this first table showcases the proportion of deaths by age group for non-Hispanic whites, Asian Americans, and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. So as you can see, a majority of pediatric deaths occur amongst infants, and across the subgroups, infant mortality was highest among Asian Indians, and for the 15 to 19-year-old age group, mortality was highest among Korean Americans. And then this table showcases the crude mortality rates and rate ratios across all causes of death. So again, highlighted in yellow, we can see that most deaths occur during infancy. And also we can see that Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders had rate ratios that were higher than 1 for every single age group compared to non-Hispanic whites. And lastly, we can see that most deaths besides infancy occur in the 15 to 19-year-old age group. And then looking at cause-specific mortality, so this is organized based on the 5 leading causes of death for each age group and each subgroup. In general, the leading causes of death were pretty similar across subgroups. However, as you can see, the order of the ranking of 1 through 5 is pretty heterogeneous. So it does change within subgroups, which highlights the importance of disaggregating data. And then for children over 1, we start to see that unintentional injury becomes an extremely prominent cause of death. And then Japanese children actually experience a higher rate of death for diseases of the heart, which we'll discuss why that might be. And then Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders differed from the general trend of death causes from other subgroups. So for example, in the 5 to 9-year age category, they had diseases of the heart as the second leading cause of death. And then for the 10 to 14-year-old age group, we can see that suicide starts creeping up as a leading cause of death, which is very alarming. And also we start to see homicide start to creep up in there. And then extremely alarming is in the 15 and 19-year-old age group, unintentional injury becomes the #1 cause of death, but suicide is the second leading cause of death for all age groups and all subgroups. So if we're looking at stratifying by biological sex, we can see that for females, the crude mortality rate for Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders was greater than every other subgroup. And looking at males, we can see that the rates for males generally exceeded females for all racial subgroups across all age groups. And for the 15 to 19-year-old age group, which is highlighted in blue, it's about double what it is for females. And yeah. So by nativity, for infants, the crude mortality rates were higher for native-born children compared to foreign-born children for every single racial subgroup, except for whites and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders. However, for children over 1, foreign-born children generally exceeded native-born children in terms of mortality. So as to the importance of this data, so there are differences among Asian American subgroups. So the 5 leading causes of death are pretty similar, but again, there is heterogeneity in the ranking, which highlights the importance of data disaggregation. So for example, we can see here, there's some causes of death that are highlighted that are pretty different than non-Hispanic whites and each other. For example, for infants, placenta cord shows up as a leading cause of death for overall Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islanders, but doesn't show up in the top 5 for non-Hispanic whites at all. So, and then again, there's some differences in the 1 to 4-year age group, and we can see that diseases of the heart are a pretty prominent problem for Japanese children, which could be due to Kawasaki disease, which is the main type of pediatric heart complication in the United States. It's a genetic condition that children of Japanese descent are particularly susceptible to, and it mostly affects children under the age of 5, which explains why it's highlighted in the 1 to 4 age group category in our data. And then for the 15 and 19-year-old age group, again, just highlighting some differences. Congenital abnormalities show up in many different subgroups, but do not show up for non-Hispanic whites. So again, extremely important to disaggregate data. And then another big takeaway is that there are significant disparities among Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander subpopulations specifically. The crude mortality rate for this group was higher than every other subgroup for every age group, and this could be due to a lack of the same quality of care as non-Hispanic whites. For example, for infants, the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services reported that in 2019, Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander mothers were 4.6 times more likely to receive late or no prenatal care compared to non-Hispanic white mothers. And also a literature review found that breastfeeding initiation rates for Native Hawaiian mothers are lower than both state and national rates. And of women who do begin breastfeeding, many do not continue breastfeeding beyond 20 weeks. So just for context, scientific literature generally supports the association between breastfeeding and a decrease in postperinatal and late neonatal deaths. So definitely could contribute to the much higher rate of infant mortality for this subgroup. And then we can also see that diseases of the heart were the second leading cause of death for the 5 to 9-year age group, which studies have shown that Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations have been found to have higher rates of cardiovascular disease. And then suicide is a higher leading cause of death for the 10 to 14-year-old age group. So this could be due to disparities in mental health access, which could be due to societal and historical intergenerational trauma. So for example, in one study from 1998, Hawaiian children were asked to choose between white, Japanese, and Hawaiian photos with regard to positive physical and social attributes, and they were more likely to choose the white and Japanese images. And it's been shown that historical trauma can lead to community-wide depression, which in turn leads to risky health behaviors and can directly contribute to pathways that lead to mortality. And then another interesting point is that only 0.01% of certified general pediatricians or certified pediatric subspecialists are Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander themselves. So there is that potential lack of culturally competent care, which does impact the patient-provider relationship and can cause a disparity in care. And then stratifying by nativity, we found that besides infants, foreign-born children generally exceeded native-born children in mortality. This was really interesting because it actually went against existing literature, which suggests the opposite. And for infants, native-born children could die more. A likely explanation is that few people immigrate to the US with infants, so the sample size is just so much smaller of infants that would die in the United States that are born somewhere else. However, literature suggests for every other age group that foreign-born children are less likely to have access to adequate healthcare services and therefore use them much less than native-born children. Like, for example, a study showed that foreign-born children were 4 times more likely than native-born children to lack health insurance coverage and were 80% more likely to not have visited a doctor or a dentist in the previous year. And also language barriers and limited parental knowledge of available resources can put foreign-born children at a disadvantage when it comes to care in the United States. So some limitations of this study were that the number of deaths for the subgroups were extremely small, especially when disaggregated. So it is hard to determine pediatric death trends among racial groups. But we can come to some conclusions from this data. And then also due to race data provided, the Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander category only included those who are Hawaiian, Samoan, and Guamanian. So we didn't look at other groups such as Tongans and Fijians, but it should be noted that the NBSS data is credible and provides the most comprehensive data on deaths in the United States. So just to reiterate, data disaggregation in this project highlights differences in causes of mortality, and Asian Americans and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander children do have distinct and unique causes of mortality compared to non-Hispanic whites. So studies like this should help public health officials create better tailored interventions and preventative actions for these populations because, again, pediatric deaths are usually preventable and kids aren't supposed to die. So the last thing I want to leave everyone with is that it's important to note that many of the top pediatric causes of death are preventable, like unintentional injury, suicide, and homicide. And I did present a lot of numbers today, but every single one of those numbers is a life, and it's important to remember that. And it's important that we continue to do research and advocate for policy change that minimizes those unnecessary deaths. So this is a link to my annotated bibliography. And I just want to thank my mentorship team from the Stanford Center for Asian Health Research. And yeah, thank you, everyone.
All right, thanks, Suhana. Do we have any questions from the audience? Not sure I see any questions yet. If I'm missing any, please feel free to let me know. I can start. I'm curious. So you were saying that this may lead to some new interventions. Do you have specific ideas on interventions that you might suggest for based on what you learned?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like from the data, it was pretty obvious that Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islanders, there isn't enough research, especially in terms of their mental health. I thought that was really interesting because I feel like children committing suicide between the ages of 10 and 14 is pretty insane. So I guess maybe more tailored interventions towards targeting maybe like the intergenerational trauma that they face, or maybe just even more research related to why that may be the case for that specific subgroup. Because when I was looking, there isn't a lot of literature on it and not a lot of recent studies. So definitely an area of a further direction that this study could go to.
Great, yeah. Taking a look, I don't see any new questions in the chat. although it may take people a minute to type in any questions. Please feel free to also raise your hands if you have any suggestions or thoughts. And I'm kind of curious, does this lead toward a particular aspect of your future career?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a global health major, so definitely it is global health research. But yeah, hopefully, I mean, one day, potentially becoming a physician. I feel like this type of like public health knowledge is definitely important to understand when you're trying to become culturally competent and provide comprehensive care. So yeah.
Yeah. Very nice, very nice. I actually want to bring back our other speakers for today and see if there's questions in general. If people in the audience would like to ask questions, please feel free to circle around. We had Mary who was talking about HIPAA and how it's a bit outdated at this point. James, who was talking about film and more specifically transnational cultural exchange between Japan and the US, and then Suhana, who's been talking about the pediatric mortality.
So I have a quick, maybe question for both Mary and Suhana, because the issues that you both dealt with really require a kind of specialized understanding of the problem, but then the ability to get out of the particular atmosphere to talk to people who are engaged with law, with education, maybe especially if we're talking about things like low birth weight, economics, resources. So how do you think about making your concerns more global in the sense of talking about them in a way that attracts people who might not have the public health background or the legal background, but who would have an interest in the impact that these conditions have on people in their communities? If you write HIPAA for people who are really thinking about legal protection, you still have to make the idea real to people outside of the law. So how do you think about presenting your work in these ways that will bring you partners and help you have some coalition?
Yeah, I can go first. So I have been involved in the public sector, in the San Diego public sector specifically, and just in general, I found that through my work with the county and the county board of supervisors specifically, we can really tap into our local government and our local lawmakers as a way to kind of bring these ideas to life in a grassroots way, because local government sometimes, and more specifically, can be the best way to get change done and to get just ideas out there to a wider audience, and in this case, constituents. And so I've had a really great time kind of talking about my ideas related to HIPAA and my article to not only elected officials, but kind of the chief of staff and policy advisors for these elected officials. And we've been able to almost like soundboard with each other. I kind of have the legal knowledge and the aspect behind things, and they have the more practical viewpoint, maybe related to policies when it comes to lawsuits or civil cases with the county. So I would say just for me, talking to individuals within the public sector and within the county specifically has been really great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, just to go off of that, my answer is pretty similar. Maybe not as much with like, I guess for my problem specifically, not as much maybe like government officials, but definitely working with like people in the healthcare sector who are already established and helping individuals understand, especially people of the Asian American or Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander community, understand that they may be at a disadvantage because that's information they may not even know. Especially people that are foreign born or whatever. So helping people become more educated on this topic, whether that's through different like foundations that are already established or through educating like healthcare professionals, especially I think people who are a part of those communities definitely have a reason to care, and I think they would if they were just educated on the topic.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Very nice. I have a question for James, actually. I noticed that you have the double major in Cog Sci, and so I'm curious, how does that play into how you're approaching looking at these films and what your thoughts are?
Sure, yeah. So my major is in cognitive science, and then I have minors in both film studies and film production, because UCSD doesn't quite have a proper film major, but we're getting there. Um, um, but yeah, I think the cog sci background has definitely influenced my work. Maybe if not so much in film studies, in film production as well. A lot of the coursework in cognitive science has to do with field research and kind of ethnographic studies where you're in situ working with your subjects a lot. And that has been a big inspiration for me in my filmmaking practice, which mostly centers on documentary. So it's a lot of ethnography and field work and observation. But in terms of film studies, I do think I'm very fortunate to have a background in the sciences. A lot of the like just experience operating in that space, especially that kind of language and like doing literature reviews has been very helpful for this project, especially where I was digging through it's 2 countries and 3 genres and many decades. So it was a lot of legwork in the research department. So I appreciated that going in.
Thank you.
Oh,
No, go
I
ahead.
guess I guess I totally forgot to mention like the most direct influence, just the whole idea of like a distributed framework is a huge part of cog sci. Distributed cognition is one of the main kind of frameworks that they teach us here. And so that way of thinking of kind of zooming out and considering things as a whole system rather than as a series of like first this happens and then this happens and then that happens, but sort of being able to step back and say, well, maybe it's all kind of interconnected. Um, was very huge for this project.
That makes a lot of sense. Thank you for sharing. I'll just check in with the floor to see if there's additional questions from anybody else that's here still. Looks like we're doing all right. Well, I know that it's a little bit past 5 and perhaps people may be switching into a new mode at this time. So I just wanted to round it off by saying thank you again to all of our speakers, Mary, James, and Suhana. You all have wonderful research that you've done, and thank you for sharing it with us. We want to hear more, so please keep doing your research and check in with us. Let us know how we can help with you, and we'll support all of you in the future. So good luck. Take care. Thanks for being here.